Please welcome Meredith Kopit Levien.
Good morning. What if I asked you to come up on stage and interview your boss? Interview your boss about, let's say, a high-profile event that your company was involved in, that a lot of people had very strong opinions about, and that some people thought you screwed up. What if it wasn't your boss, but your boss's boss's boss? Let's listen for a minute and see if this works. Can we listen?
Okay. We're going to start. Welcome to the Daily Studio. I believe this is my first time here. First time here?
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dean, I actually want to start in a kind of unexpected place with a hiring announcement that the Times made a few years back. So I'm going to ask you to read this email.
I'm delighted to announce that Amy Chozick will be joining our political team with a special focus reporting on Hillary Clinton and the Clinton family.
So let's stop there. That is Michael Barbaro, host of our hit podcast, smashing hit podcast, The Daily, and he is interviewing his boss's boss's boss, Dean Baquet, who you see right there, who's the executive editor of the New York Times, about our coverage of the 2016 election. I want to say it wasn't an easy conversation for either of them. You see that piece of paper sitting there in front of Dean. That's a story from 2015. And Michael is asking Dean to consider whether our very early coverage of Hillary as a front runner and our later coverage of Bernie as an also-ran and later coverage of Trump as an impossibility might have shaped the very surprising outcome of the 2016 election. Now, I want to say to you that 6.5 years ago, when I came to the New York Times, everything about that scene would have been very hard to imagine, not least because The Daily, which is now one of the most consumed sources of news on earth, didn't exist. And in case you aren't among the 2 million plus people who listen to The Daily every day, let me take a minute and just describe its format. Runs for about 30 minutes, and every day it is basically a deep dive into one big story, Michael interviewing the journalists in that story and sometimes the sources. And at the end of that one big story, Michael always says the same line, which is now famous: here's what else you need to know today. But that wasn't always famous, and it wasn't even obvious. There is a great story in the building that when the early prototype of The Daily was brought for the first time to a New York Times executive, he listened to it, the team was so excited, and then he furrowed up his brow and he said, "It's good, but shouldn't the headlines be up front?" Because of course, the Times had been giving headlines first for 168 years, but obviously the Daily team didn't take that advice. They didn't take that advice because they fundamentally got that they weren't just retooling an old thing for a new format. Digital transformation is littered with examples of that. The Daily was actually born instead out of a vision of what could be. So in an institution known for its enduring incumbency, The Daily was insurgent. And insurgent, which 6.5 years of running digital transformation at the Times has also taught me to be, and that's what I'm here to talk about. My first job at the New York Times was in 2013. I was brought there to run the ad business, which was in a free fall, not just in print, but also in digital. We'd long ago lost our monopoly pricing power in print, and in digital, by the time I arrived, it looked like the big tech platforms were going to win all of at least the early wars for digital advertising. And it wasn't hard to imagine that advertisers wouldn't need brands like the Times or premium publishers at all anymore to reach their audiences. So the big question was, what did they need? It was clear that they would always need big ideas and the opportunity to have impact. But that wasn't what our business was. So in a radically transformed ad environment, we realized it had to be. We needed a business centered on that. And we traded out an old school, kind of long-held, sales-led approach for an idea and creative-driven business. It was insurgent. The change was hard. It was dramatic. It had a lot of pushback. It involved seemingly endless opportunities to have to go in front of people and say, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it and how it's going to work. There's a lot of very, very hard people turnover. I came away with a profound sense of how the decisions I made as a leader could actually impact other people's lives. It was insurgent, but it worked. Within a year, we had restored our digital business to growth and ended up with a business that could actually bring huge ideas to the world and have impact, like what I'm showing you behind me, which is a very big partnership we have actually with our hosts, Verizon, to power a new kind of journalism in 5G. So I'd like to tell you that being an insurgent came naturally to me. It didn't. In fact, I'd spent, you saw this in the video, most of my career up until I got to the Times running other people's insurgencies, executing their visions for how the world should be. But at the Times, leading insurgency was my only option. And I didn't know I was wired to make the bold moves as a leader until I was required to do it, which was my first real lesson of insurgency. You have to actually make the choice to go do something where you don't have a choice but to be an insurgent. I chose having to be an insurgent. So after the reinvention of our ad business, I was given the chance to run another insurgency. This one was on our subscription business, and it was different in two really big ways. One was that the stakes were much higher. The Times had basically bet the farm on being a direct-to-consumer subscription business and needed to figure out how to scale it. And also was different for me because I had no particular expertise to offer as I had in the ad business. I'd come up through the ad business. But I soon learned that that expertise, or having the answers of what we should do, wasn't the reason I was given the job. That lesson also didn't come very easily to me because being close to the work was where I was most comfortable. Having the answers had been the thing that had gotten me where I was in my career. Actually being able to ask the right questions, that was a really new thing. So I learned my second big lesson of leading an insurgency, which was about the need to actually lift up out of the work. And I had to be pushed and prodded to do it. But once I did it, I could see very easily what the problem was. We had this extraordinary brand and we had an incredible mission, but in a changed world, we had done an insufficient job of explaining either of those two things. And I also saw very clearly that the highest value work for me, at least at first, was to go out and find the top talent who could help us do that. So I want to say another reason that lifting up when you rise from one leadership job to another on a higher perch was also really hard for me, because when you actually realize that the problem that needs to be solved isn't something you know how to do, that's a pretty scary thing. And you go out and you hire people who can do it. And my first thought, at least, was then, well, what is my value? Why do they still need me here? But in fact, they did need me there to keep lifting up, to actually shape the context to allow them to do their best work. What they really wanted was for me to do that, get out of the way, and let them do it. I did, and they have, and our brand work has been a huge propellant to the Times business. And it turns out that shaping the context, which you can only do when you lift up, is the high value work of a leader. So interestingly, shaping context is also what makes The Daily so different and so valuable. You don't just get the story, but you get the context that, that it travels in. And I have a colleague who's actually here in the audience who leads the business of The Daily, who likes to say that The Daily feels like it's made for people who are brand new to the New York Times, and most of our audience is. They're much more likely to be under 40 and women than the core New York Times, but it feels that way because it's made by people who are brand new to the New York Times. They came in with a different kind of expertise, and they saw an opportunity to make a different kind of magic. And if you think about that, by the way, as the team, with the exception of Michael, nearly all new to the New York Times. And when you think about that, the things that make The Daily so magical are things that don't really happen in a newspaper story. It's the brilliant narrative and the scene setting and the dramatic arc that goes with it. And those things come from radio producers and sound engineers and audio editors. So make no mistake, The Daily is certainly still news, but it is news delivered in a thoroughly accessible and enjoyable, and I think totally addictive new way. Which brings me to my next big point about insurgency, and that is that you have to win the game that is actually being played around you. So today, more than 5 million people subscribe to the New York Times, which sounds like a really big number until you consider the fact that as many as 50 million people every week land on a New York Times story, and most of them are coming there from Google or Facebook or somewhere on the internet where they're already spending a ton of their time, and often specifically their news time. So the really big business opportunity for the New York Times is to get those people to come back directly, form a habit, and pay and stay. And to do that, we have to win at the game the big tech platforms are playing, which means we have to be not just a great place for journalists and marketers and audio people to work, but a great place for the kind of talent that makes world-class digital products, like engineers and data scientists and product managers and designers. And I want to say, for a 168-year-old company, that is no easy task. It means restructuring how roughly 1,000 people go about their work. It's breaking down kind of crusty old silos, functional silos left over from an old business, and reimagining the work into objective-based cross-functional teams that draw from all over the building. It's not just about rearranging an org chart. It's actually about putting software development at the center of our business work. It's modernizing our culture, bringing up a new and more diverse generation of leaders who are known for their ability to collaborate. And this one is particular to me, it's about letting go of kind of old school top-down management approaches and empowering hundreds of teams and thousands of people to work together to propel the business forward. And in a way, what it's really doing is wiring insurgency structurally and culturally into the whole thing, because the big idea about insurgency in the rapidly changing world that we're living in is that it's not done. It's never done, and nor am I growing as a leader. So let me finish where I started and go back to Dean Baquet. Okay, that's not actually Dean Baquet. That is he's sitting in Dean's chair in the Daily booth. That's the insurgent in my house who prepares me to actually deal with the thousands of people we've empowered at work. And I can tell you, this insurgency has made my life 1,000 times better, like all the insurgency we've ignited at the Times has made the Times better. And the last thing I want to say to you about insurgency is that we've transformed, but the core value of what we do hasn't actually changed a lick. And that is why it is working, and that is why Dean Baquet is smiling, because at its core, the thing we do, independent journalism, is insurgent. It's about making change, challenging the conventional wisdom, launching big social movements like Me Too. It's even about grilling your boss. And the good news is we're going to keep doing that for a very long time. Thank you.